Hello, it is Mrs. Slade here, and today we are going to be talking about potable water. Water is really important. It is a vital resource for life and industries and agriculture, and yeah, it's quite an interesting lesson. That is not sarcasm. I genuinely believe that potable water is a very interesting topic. So we are going to understand the methods involved in making potable water, and we'll explain what that is in due course, and discuss the importance of those processes. So I'm going to start you with a little bit of literacy, because we all love a poem. I'm going to read you this very famous poem, where you just have a think about what it might mean. Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. So that is a quote from a very famous poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and it was written in 1798 by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And at that point in the poem, which is a very long poem, the ship is actually stuck in the middle of the ocean and has been for weeks and weeks. So there's water everywhere. They're surrounded by water, but none of it is suitable for drinking. Why is that? Well, obviously the water that they're surrounded by is seawater, has a very high salt content. Drinking that water would not be good for the body, as the increase in salts would just dehydrate the body even more, making the drinker more thirsty and more dehydrated. If that continued to be their only water source, then they would soon die. I want you to pause the video now and watch the video link that I have put there. It is a TED Talk. I have put the video link on EduLink, so pause the video now and watch the other video. So a few key notes then from that video. The water cycle means that water isn't actually lost from the earth. You do about the water cycle in biology, so it's paper 2 biology in chapter B16. So when we do biology, we will be looking at the water cycle, but the water cycle means that water is constantly moving from being kept in lakes and rivers and seas, evaporating into the air, turning into precipitation like rain, and going back into rivers and going into underground aquifers. Most of the Earth's water is salt water. We have access to about 1% of the world's water, and most of that is used in agriculture. So farmers have to find ways to try and reduce the need of using so much water. So there's lots of different technologies coming out to try and stop them using as much water as they do. And that would make water more available for those countries that have very limited supplies, and we can distribute it a lot more easily, although that does cost a lot of money in itself. So hopefully you're now comfortable with why water is so important and why we are learning. It is essential for life. There is plenty of it, but it has to be the right quality if we use it. And by good quality, I mean it's low on dissolved salts, and it's also low on microbes, especially if we're trying to drink it, because if it's full of bacteria, then you're going to get sick very quickly. Water that is safe to drink is called potable water. So when you see the term potable water, it just means drinking water. It contains a small amount of dissolved minerals and is very low on microbes, if none at all. Now, you should not be confusing this with pure water. Pure water is just H2O, pure H2O, nothing dissolved in it. We often use it in lab experiments, and we call it distilled water. You shouldn't drink pure water or distilled water because it can interfere with our own cells' water content and will actually cause them to burst. So you don't want to drink water with nothing in it. Potable water should have a small amount of dissolved substances inside. So in the UK, most of our water comes from rain. We are quite a rainy island. It rains quite a lot. It is a bit of an ongoing joke, but it is our life source. That rain is stored in rivers and in streams, and eventually is stored in a reservoir. So here are two reservoirs that you may know about. The picture at the top is Buell Water, and the picture at the bottom is Bow Beach Reservoir, both quite nearby to where we are now. The map shows you all the reservoirs that are in the UK, and you can see that we have quite a few. And well, although this was from 2007, this diagram, generally the reservoirs are full. Okay, so we do have a very good supply of fresh water. Most reservoirs are also nature reserves, which is really good because we're providing habitats for lots of different types of birds and other animals, as well as having our own source of drinkable water. Now, obviously, you are not going to want to drink water straight from the reservoir. You would need to clean it first. So this diagram just shows you that process. I'm going to talk through the diagram, and then I want you to just pause the video and make your own sort of flow diagram in your books. You don't have to use pictures and things, but just a flow diagram to show the process that needs to be taken in order to clean fresh reservoir water. So the first thing that happens right at the top is that water passes through a screen, and that is made of big sort of metal bars, and it's just there to catch very large objects like leaves and twigs and things like that. You go then into a settlement tank with where the sand and the soil settles out onto the bottom and the water sort of passes on over the top. You then go to another tank where aluminium sulfate and lime are added. That causes particles of dirt to clump together so that they can sink to the bottom and create a sort of sludge, and that sludge is basically just mud. The water then passes through an even smaller filter made of sand and gravel, and that helps just to remove the last sort of bits of mud and grit to make sure the water is really clean. Now, obviously, it will look like clean water, but it will still have some harmful bacteria and other microbes in. So there are different ways that we can sterilize this water in order to kill that bacteria. We could add chlorine to the water, and that will kill any bacteria, much like they do in a swimming pool where they add chlorine. That's also to kill bacteria. Alternatively, they can use something called ozone, or they can use ultraviolet light. Okay, so they will both help to sterilize the water. Finally, you check the pH of the water so that you're checking that it's actually neutral, and then it is stored in large tanks and surface reservoirs ready to go into the homes, into schools, offices, etc. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is just pause the video. You can either make your own diagram or a flow chart just to show from a reservoir to the home what happens to the water. Okay. So reservoirs aren't our only source of water. We can also treat wastewater. We produce a huge amount of wastewater. So just having a look at these diagrams here, washing machines, dishwashers, showers, all the taps that you have, your toilet, all of these produce wastewater. If we didn't do anything with that water, then we would just have untreated waste going into our water systems, which we don't want, because that will diminish the amount of fresh water that we actually have available to us. So all of our wastewater drains into the sewers, and this includes waste not just from households, but lots of different industries and other businesses. And altogether, that wastewater is called sewage. Okay, so generally we think of sewage as water from the toilet, but that is part of it, but it's all the wastewater. So it will be all the bath water and sink water as well. Obviously, unlike water in our reservoirs, sewage contains very large amounts of harmful microbes, lots of that organic matter, and lots of harmful chemicals, depending on what industries it has come from. So we can turn that back into potable water at something called a sewage treatment plant. So what I'd like you to do now is, again, pause the video, and you can watch the video link that I have here, which is also on EduLink. And I want you to watch that video and answer these 3 questions. Okay, so pause the video now, watch the video attached, and answer those 3 questions, please. Okay, so hopefully you have had a good go at answering the questions from the video. So the 5 main stages of sewage treatment. Stage 1 is screening. Okay, screening is to remove large matter, so a little bit like they do in the reservoir, but that large matter is going to be things like rags, wet wipes, nappies, condoms, anything else that silly people put down the toilet that they shouldn't. They're the sort of things that sewage is going to remove. Second stage is sedimentation beds. Again, so we're trying to remove grit and sludge. The grit all sinks to the bottom because it's heavy, and then it's sort of pushed away and sort of cleaned. The sludge is sort of made of grease and oils, and they float on the surface. So that is scraped off the top and is saved for later. The third stage is our first biological treatment stage. It's basically anaerobic digestion of sewage. So we've got lots of bacteria, and that bacteria is actually breaking down the organic matter. It's digesting the organic matter and removing it that way. Part 4, biological treatment, part 2, we pump lots and lots of air into the sewage, or into the effluent as it is now, and that provides lots and lots of oxygen. So before we were doing anaerobic digestion, so we had bacteria that were respiring anaerobically, did not have oxygen. Now we have lots of oxygen available, so we can start aerobic respiration, where we are respiring with oxygen. That further breaks down the organic matter and actually helps to speed up the process of digestion. Finally, the treated water is tested and it is checked that it's clean enough to re-enter the freshwater system, and then it just is pumped back out into the rivers and will either, become part of the water cycle again, or go into a reservoir or go into the sea. Question 2, what happens to the sludge collected? So it's taken away and it is all compressed into pellets, and then those pellets can be burnt as a biofuel in order to release energy. How is that beneficial to the environment and the treatment plants? So biofuel is renewable because it comes from waste, so that waste is always being produced, and therefore we can always make those sort of pellets of energy. It also stops that waste from going to landfill. So at landfill, it can cause further problems and release greenhouse gases or release toxins into the environment. So it stops it going to landfill. And it also means that the treatment plant has its own source of energy. So the treatment plant doesn't have to use other, maybe non-renewable sources in order to run the plant. It also, of course, will save the plant money that way because they don't have to pay to dispose of the sludge, of the waste, and they don't need to pay for different energy resources. So it's a bit of a win-win situation. Now, some countries are not like us, and they do not have a lot of rain, and they do not have a lot of freshwater reservoirs. So have a think about what they would do. In these 2 pictures here, The first picture is of a desalination plant in a place called Ashkelon in Israel. And this is a coastal town. So their main water supply is the sea, but as we've already talked about, the sea is full of salt. And the picture on the right is a saltwater reservoir in San Diego. So it is a reservoir, but it is full of salt. So the key thing here is that there is lots of water available, but it's very salty. So what would they have to do? Well, in order to turn this salt water into potable water, they have to remove that salt, and that is called desalination. There are two ways in which desalination can occur. So here is that key term, desalination, just in case you were unsure of the spelling. So desalination is removing salt from salty water. The first way is distillation. Now, you would have come across distillation in year 7. You would have done this experiment in year 7. I would like you to pause the video and see if you can label the equipment. If you're having trouble, here are the labels that you can add to it. Pause the video, see if you can have a go at labeling those different bits of equipment. Okay, let's see if you have got that right. So here are the answers. Hopefully you got these all right. So hopefully you can remember in distillation you heat the water in your round bottomed flask. That turns the water part into a gas, which then rises up, passes through the condenser where it is cooled and condenses back into a liquid, and that liquid falls into the boiling tube. So the boiling tube is then containing pure water and not containing the salt, which will be left behind in the round bottomed flask. Obviously, this is done on a much larger scale in real life. Next lesson, you will be doing a required practical, which looks at analysing and purifying water. The second method is something called reverse osmosis. So osmosis, as we know, is the movement of particles from where there are a high concentration of water particles to low, or where we've got something which is low concentrated to high concentrated. In reverse osmosis, we're taking something where it has less water particles, so it's a more concentrated solution, and we are trying to get the water to move out of that into a less concentrated solution. So it's the opposite of how osmosis would normally work. In order to do this, we need to have pressure. So we need to use pressure to force the water through a semi-permeable membrane. Now that semi-permeable membrane will ensure that only the water molecules can get through, and the salt, which is too big, will get left behind. Okay, so our unfiltered water is pressured to pass through the permeable membrane, and then the water, which is allowed through, goes out the other side, and you have your pure filtered water at the other end. I would like you to pause the video and jot down the diagram and label it, and just write a little explanation of how it works. Okay, what I would like you to do now, just to end, is to write a definition for each of these keywords and how they obviously linked to the water purification process. So I would like you to pause the video now, write some definitions, and then I will put up the correct answers. So, definition of filtering is removing insoluble particles from water like grit and mud. Sterilizing is adding chemicals to water to kill pathogens, for example chlorine, and don't forget it can also be done by adding ozone or by using UV light. Desalinating is removing salt from brine. Brine is salty water, to leave just pure water behind. And distilling is heating your salty water until the water turns to steam, condensing that steam and collecting the pure water. So that is the end of today's lesson. Tomorrow, as I said before, you will be looking at a required practical, analysing and purifying salty water and water from different sources. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to email. Goodbye.